Ukrainian culture used to be often boxed up in the West under the label something post-Soviet. You know, Borscht somewhere next to the balalaika, Kyiv somewhere next to Moscow. But in 2026, suddenly, wearing Ukrainian brands became fashionable. Ruslan Baginsky is sold at Selfridge, and his pieces are worn by Bella Hadid and Emily Ratajkowski. Bevza is showcased at New York Fashion Week, and Litkovska regularly appears in Vogue Business and Business of Fashion. But Ukrainian culture became interesting not when people started to pity it, but when they saw in it a unique style and character. You are on the Focus channel. Today, we're going to analyze whether Ukrainian culture has truly become a global trend or if it's just a brief flash of solidarity. Let's start with the main point. Ukrainian culture didn't suddenly become fashionable. The year 2022 wasn't the beginning, it was a sharp acceleration. The first major turning point happened after 2014. After the Maidan and the start of the war, Ukraine began actively cutting itself off from the Russian cultural sphere. And not just politically. New institutions emerged. The Ukrainian Institute began systematically working on cultural diplomacy. Music Export Ukraine started bringing artists to international showcases like Eurosonic and Reeperbahn. Billboard and Music Business Worldwide wrote about this. And most importantly, Ukraine began to explain itself without translation through Moscow.
In a metaphorical sense today for Ukraine, culture serves as a powerful shield against aggression, but it is also a sharp sword that we can use to effectively communicate our message to the world.
Before this, we were often genuinely perceived as just somewhere near Russia. This is not an exaggeration. It's enough to look at old BBC or The Guardian materials from before 2014. After 2014, this pattern started to break down. I'll say briefly about Eurovision. This was also an important moment, but I've already made a separate episode about it. Watch it after this video. The analysis there is much more detailed. And after February 24, 2022, the attention simply exploded. If you enjoy these kinds of analyses, subscribe to Focus, hit the like button, and let's keep going, because the most interesting part is coming up. It's important not to confuse the cause with the catalyst. The war put a spotlight on Ukraine, but there was already something to highlight. The world didn't start searching for Ukrainian things for just one reason. Several factors came together here. After the invasion, Ukraine became the main topic in the news. People were donating, brands were doing collaborations, and the media were explaining who Ukrainians are. For example, in 2022, Balenciaga held a show with a direct message about the war, and Vogue regularly published articles about Ukrainian designers and artists. But sympathy is not a strategy, it's only a short-term resource. The Reuters Institute in its digital news report states directly that 39% of people worldwide avoid the news, and among the reasons is fatigue from the war in Ukraine. In other words, attention exists, but it is not endless. However, Spotify, TikTok, and YouTube do not like an average, globalized product. They prefer something recognizable. And here, Ukrainian music has done very well. Kalush Orchestra has over 70 million streams of Stefania on Spotify. Alyona and Jerry Heil have tens of millions of listens. These platforms have no emotions. They are based on algorithms. And these algorithms show Ukrainian works precisely because it is Ukrainian. Language, rhythm, and intonation are not barriers, but our hook. After 2022, many Western media outlets suddenly realized that for decades they had been looking at Ukraine through a Russian lens. The New York Times, The Guardian, even Wikipedia began massively correcting their own materials. By the way, about Wikipedia, the Ukraine's Culture Diplomacy Month campaign in 2022 resulted in more than 3,800 new articles in 60 languages. In 2026, there will be more than 1,500 more. This is really important because, for example, when a journalist in France Googles a Ukrainian artist, they should find a proper article, not a Russian version with a strange biography. Also, after 2022, millions of Ukrainians ended up abroad, and culture traveled with them. Ukrainian books in Polish bookstores, Ukrainian parties in Berlin, Ukrainian restaurants in London. Even though this is a forced reality, it works. The Ukrainian Institute, Ukrainian.ua, United 24, the translation program, festivals, showcases, all of this turns attention into contracts. But the main question is this already a trend or not yet? The answer is both yes and no. On the one hand, attention is declining. Brand Ukraine, in its 2024 report, states global interest in Ukraine has been decreasing since its peak in 2022. The share of support-related topics has dropped from 32 to 21%. Google Trends shows the same thing. There was a peak, but then a decline followed. On the other hand, the image is also changing. In the same report, the characteristic creative people appears at 13%. That is, Ukraine is starting to be seen as more than just a war, because a trend is when people recognize you. This is very noticeable in fashion. Ruslan Baginsky is a global brand. Bevza has regular shows in New York. Anna October collaborates with international platforms. Vogue, Business of Fashion, and High Snobiety write about this. And this is already a product. In cinema, Ukrainian films regularly make it to Cannes, Berlinale, and Sundance. In literature, translations of Ukrainian authors are increasing, but of course, there are also risks. People can't constantly consume tragedy. They simply close the feed. When Ukrainian content is shown only as a suffering, it does work, but not for long. The creative industries are working under sirens, mobilization, and a lack of money, and this doesn't really contribute to stable exports. Ukraine is well known in Europe and the USA, but much less so in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Brand Ukraine states directly the indicators are lowest there. So, a global trend is not yet a fact, but rather a strong regional breakthrough. So what's next? The most realistic scenario is less hype, more structure, fewer people just posting flags, and more contracts, festivals, translations, and tours, because hype burns out quickly, but infrastructure does not. In the long term, there are two options. First, Ukraine builds a system: exports, translations, management, markets. Second, there remain only isolated successes without a system. And then the world will do what it regularly does: switch to the next topic. So the answer is simple. Ukrainian culture has already moved beyond a brief flash, but it will only become a major trend if there is a system behind it. Yes, Ukrainian culture became known not because people pitied us, but because they started to recognize us. And now, the main thing is not to mess this up. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which Ukrainian artists or brands are truly ready for a global breakthrough. In the next video, we'll look at where the world is not just inspired by Ukrainian things, but openly copies them and sells them as their own. Because when you become noticeable, people start copying you, and not always with credit.